Welcome back to the DevOps Week by Simplilearn. So far, we have mastered the introduction to DevOps, Dockers and Kubernetes, DevOps testing, DevOps and cloud, and the important DevOps development tools. So far, we have finished the major fundamentals of DevOps. Now the next important step would be to get prepared for an interview. In today's session, we will be learning the most frequently asked DevOps interview questions. So without further ado, let's get started. In today's live session of DevOps interview questions, we will be discussing the following questions. First, we will go through the Git interview questions. Followed by that, we will learn some Maven interview questions. Then followed by that, we have the Selenium interview questions. And then we dive into Chef, Puppet, and Ansible based interview questions. And followed by that, we have Docker interview questions. Then we will look into the Kubernetes interview questions. Then we have Nagios. And finally, we will wind up this live session with Jenkins interview questions. Now I hope I made myself clear with the agenda. Now let's get started with this live session on DevOps interview questions.
Git is the most popular distributed version control system used for source code management. It helps coders to coordinate and track their code. We have compiled the most important Git interview questions that you might face in a Git or DevOps interview. So without further ado, let's get started with Git interview questions and answers.
So let's just get into those source code management, and we're going to focus specifically on Git. The reason being is that Git is really the most popular source code management solution right now. There are other technologies out there, but for the types of distributed environments that we have, source code management with Git is probably the most effective. So the first question you'll be asked when it comes to Git is to talk about the difference between centralized and distributed version control. And if we look at the way that the two are set up, older technologies such as older versions of Team Foundation Server, though the current version does actually have Git in it, but older versions required a centralized server for you to check in and check out of code. The developer in the centralized system does not have all the files for the application, and if the centralized server crashes, then you actually lose all of the history of your code. Now, in contrast, a distributed model, actually we do check in our code to a server. However, for you to be effective and building out your solution, you actually check out all of the code for the solution directly onto your local development machine. So you can actually have a copy of the entire solution running on your local machine. This allows you to be able to work effectively offline. It really allows for scalability when it comes to building out your team. So if you have a team that may be in Europe, you can actually then scale that team with people from Asia, from North America or South America very easily, and not have to worry about whether or not they have the right code or the wrong code. And in addition to that, if the actual main server where you're checking in your code does crash, it's not a big deal because you actually have, each person has a copy of the code. So as soon as the server comes back up, you're able to check back in and everybody's running back as if there was nothing had happened at all. So one of the questions you'll be asked is to give the answer to some of the commands you use for working with Git. So if you were to be asked a question is, what is the Git command that downloads any repository from GitHub to your computer? On the screen we have four options. We have Git push, Git fork, Git clone, and Git commit. The answer in this instance would be Git clone. Now, if you want to be able to push code from your local system to a GitHub repository using Git, then first of all, you want to be able to do is connect the local repository to a remote repository. And in the example, you may want to talk about using the command git remote add origin and then the actual path to a GitHub repository. You could, if you wanted to, actually at this point also talk about other repositories such as GitLab that you can also work with, or a private Git repository that would be used just for the development team. Once you've actually then added the local repository into your local computer, then the second action you want to use is a push, which is to actually push your local files out to the master environment. So you use the command git push origin master. So one question you may be asked is, what is the difference between a bare repository and a standard way of initializing a Git repository? So let's look through what is the standard way. So the standard way using git init allows you to create a working directory using the command git init, and then the folder that creates is the folder that creates all the revision history related to the work that you're doing. In contrast, using the bear way, you have a different commands for setting that up. So it would be git init -- bear, and it does not contain any working or checked out source files locally on your machine. In addition, the revision history is actually stored in the root folder versus a subfolder that you would have with the normal git init initialization. So which of the following CLI commands would you be used to rename a file? So we have git rm, git mv, git rm-r, or none of the above. Well, in this instance, it would be git mv. A question that you'll be asked around commit is going to be, what is the process to revert a commit that has already been pushed and made public? And there are two ways you can address this. The first is to actually address the bad file in the new commit, and you can use the command git commit -m and then put in a comment for why that file is being removed. The second is to actually create a new commit that actually undoes all the changes that were made with the bad commit. And then to do that, you would use git revert and then the commit ID, and the commit ID could be something such as 560E0938F, but you'd have to find that from the commit that you had made, but that would allow you to revert any bad files that you had submitted. So there are two ways of being able to get files from a Git repository, and you're going to be asked to explain the difference between git fetch and git pull. So git fetch allows you to fetch and download only new data from a new repository. It does not integrate any of the new data into your working files, and it can be undone at any time if you want to break out the remote tracking branches. In contrast, git pull updates the current head branch with the latest changes from the remote server. So you get all of the files downloaded. It downloads new data and integrates it with the current working files you have on your system, and it tries to merge remote changes with your local ones. So one of the questions you'll get asked about Git is, what is a Git stash? So as a developer, you will be working on the current branch within a solution. But what happens if you come up with an idea where it's something that will take a different amount of time for you to be able to complete, but you don't want to interrupt the mainline branch? So what you can actually do is you can actually create a branch that allows you to start working on your own work outside of the mainline branch. And this is called Git stash. It allows you to be able to modify your files without interrupting the mainline branch. So once you start talking about branching in Git, be prepared to answer and explain the concept of branching. So essentially what it allows you to do is have a mainline master branch that has all the code that the team is checking in and checking out against, but allows you to have an indefinite number of branches that allows for new features to be built in parallel to the mainline branch, and then at some point be reintroduced to the mainline branch to allow the team to add in new features. And so if we look through the merge and git rebase, these are the two features that you'd be using continuously to be able to talk about how you take a branch and merge it back into the mainline branch. So on the left hand side we have git merge, which allows you to take the code that you're creating and merge it back into the master. On the right hand side what you have is a slightly different approach. This is for projects where you reach a point in a project where you go, okay, we're going to effectively restart the project at this point in time, and we want to ignore the complete history that's happened before that, and that's called git rebase, and that would allow you to rewrite the project history by creating a brand new mainline branch that ignores all other previous branches that have happened before it. You can, if you want to, very quickly and easily find out all the files that have been used to make a particular commit. So when somebody asks you the question, how do you find a list of files that has been changed in a particular commit, you can actually say that all you have to go is find the command git diff-tree-r and then the hash that you would use for the commit. And that would actually then give you a breakdown of all the files that have been made with that particular commit. A question that you'll be asked when you're talking about merging files is, what is a merge conflict in Git? And how can it be resolved? So essentially a merge conflict is when you have two or more branches that are competing with commits in Git, and you have to be able to determine which is the appropriate files that need to be submitted. And this is where you would go in, and to actually help resolve this issue, you'd actually go in and manually edit the conflicted files to select the changes you want to keep in the final merge. So let me go through the steps that you would take to be able to illustrate this when you're talking about this particular question in your interview. There are essentially 4 stages. The first would be under the repository name, you want to select a pull request, and you want to be able to show how that pull request would be demonstrated inside of GitHub. So within the pull request, there's going to be a highlight of conflict markers, and you'll be able to select which conflicts you want to keep and which you want to merge and which ones you want to change. So it's a step through how you would actually resolve a merge conflict. The first step would be under GitHub. You want to be able to pull the repository name and then the pull request around that repository. In the pull request list, click the pull request with a merge conflict and that you'd like to be able to resolve. That will pull up a file that will list out all of the conflicts for you. Near the bottom of that file will be a list of the requests that need to be resolved. And then if you need to make a decision on which branches you want to keep or which ones you want to change, that will have to be something you have to put in instructions inside of the file. You'll actually see that there are conflict markers within the instructions which are going to ask you which files you want to change and which ones you want to keep. If you have more than one merge conflict in your file, scroll down to the next set of conflict markers and repeat steps 4 and 5 until you resolve all of the conflicts. You will want to mark your file as resolved in GitHub so that the repository knows that you are having everything resolved. If you have more than one file with a conflict, then you want to go then onto the next file and start working on those files and just keep repeating the steps we've done up to this point until you have all of the conflicts resolved. And then once you have all of the resolutions created, then you want to select the button which is commit merge and then merge all your files back into GitHub, and this will take care and manage the resolution of the merge conflict within GitHub. So you can also do this through command line, and with command line you want to use git bash, and so you want to, as a first step, open up git bash and then navigate to the local git repository in command line using the cd change directory and then list out the actual folder where you actually are putting all of your code, and then you want to be able to generate a list of the files that are affected with the merge conflict. And in this instance here, you can actually see the file styleguide.md has a merge conflict in it. And as before, with working with GitHub, you actually go through and use a text editor, and you can use any text editor. But as you go through and edit out what you want to keep and what you want to manage in your conflict, so you actually have a resolution that's being created, so that you'll be able to then, once you're using the conflict markers, you can actually merge your files together so that the solution itself will allow you to incorporate your commits effectively into the resolution. Once you've gone through and applied your changes, you're able to then merge the conflicted commits into a single commit and able to push that up to your remote repository.
Welcome everyone to this topic in which we are going to talk about that what exactly is the different Maven interview questions here. Now in this one we are going to talk about what are the different questions, some couple of questions we are going to go through, and we'll try to understand that what exactly the answers are. Now let's talk about the first question over here. So what exactly is in Maven here? So Maven is nothing but a kind of a popular open source build tool which is available there. Now before Maven, there were a couple of build tools which was present like Ant and a lot of other legacy tools was present there. But after that, Maven is something which was released as an open source tool, and it really helps the organization to automate some couple of build processes, and have some particular mechanisms like build, publish, and deploys of different projects at once itself. So it's a very powerful tool which can really help us to do the build automations. We can integrate them with the other tools like Jenkins, and we can automate them, we can schedule the builds. So a lot of various advantages we can get with the help of this tool here. It's primarily written in Java, and it can be used to build up various other kind of projects also, like C Sharp, Scala, Ruby, etc. So all these other typical tools can also be built up with the help of this tool. So this tool is primarily used to do the particular development and management of the artifacts in the Java based projects. So for most of the Java based projects nowadays, this is the default tool, and it's already integrated with the Eclipse also. So when you go for a new Maven project, automatically it will be created for a Java project. You can use it for other languages also, but yes, default choice of Java, of the Java programming language, is Maven build tool only. Now let's talk about the next question. So what does the Maven help with? So Apache Maven helps to manage all the processes such as build process, documentation, release process, distribution, deployment, preparing the artifacts. So all these tasks is being primarily taken care by the Apache Maven. So this tool simplifies the process of project building. It also increases the performance of the project and the overall building process. So all these things are something which is being taken care by the specific Maven tool here. So it also uses the particular, it downloads the jar files of the different dependencies. For example, if your source code is dependent on some of the Apache Web Service jar files or some of the other third-party jar files, in that case, you don't have to download those jar files and keep in some repository or keep it in some lib directory. You just have to mention that dependency in the Maven, and that jar file will be downloaded during the build process and will be cached locally. So that's the biggest advantage which we get with Maven, that you don't have to take care of all these dependencies anywhere into your source code system. So Maven provides easy access to all the required information. It helps the developer to build the projects, and without even worrying about the dependencies, processes, or different environments, or different, because it's an kind of tool which can be used in any platform, Linux or Windows. So they don't have to do any kind of conversions. So all they have to do is that they have to just add new dependencies, and that should be updated into the POM file, and depending on that dependencies, the source code will be built up, and they don't have to refer any kind of third-party jar files. So they don't have to play with the class paths during the build process. So no customizations is actually required with this one. Now the next question is that what are the different elements that Maven take care of? So there are different kind of elements which is being taken care by Maven. So these particular elements are builds, dependencies, reports, distribution, releases, and mailing list. So these are the typical different elements which is being taken care by the Maven during the build process and during the preparation of the builds here. So all these things you can they can explore, they can extract on that part, and they can fully understand that how they can work on all these different processes. Now next question is that what is the primary difference between the and Maven? First of all, both of them are primarily used for the Java-based project. So AND is the older version, and Maven is something which was launched after the AND here. So AND has no formal conventions which can be coded into the build.xml file there. But yes, the Maven has conventions, so information is not required as such in the pom.xml file there. So AND is procedural, whereas Maven is declarative over here. So AND does not have any kind of life cycle, so it depends on you that how you program the AND there. But Maven is having a lot of life cycles there which we can configure, we can utilize. So the AND related scripts are not reusable because you cannot reuse it, and you have to do some kind of customizations in order to work on that. But yes, Maven is not having much of the project related any kind of dependencies. They can be easily reusable there because there is nothing about the pom.xml file. It's just the artifact name and the dependencies, which is something we can override or we can change, and then the same pom.xml file we can reuse as such for the new project also. So that is where the reusability comes into the picture. Now Ant is a very specific build tool, so we don't have to, there is no plugins as such which is available there. You just have to code everything that what build process you want to prepare. Whereas in case of Maven, we have the concept of plugins, which can really help us to understand that how we can make use of these plugins so that we can have the reusability implemented. So these are some of the differences which is available there between the Ant and Maven here. Now next thing is that what exactly is in POM file all about. So POM file is nothing but it's kind of a XML file which is available there, and it's having all the information regarding the project and the configuration details. So it primarily used over here that how the configuration needs to be done and how the setup should be performed as such here. So pom.xml file is the build script which we prepare. You can prepare it using a particular component, or you can have a particular mechanisms, or if you feel that you want to have some kind of setup. So all these things typically can be implemented, can be done with the help of build tools. So build tools can be really helpful for us to do the automations, and it can really help us to understand that how some build processes we can automate with simply with the help of pom.xml file here. So the developers usually put up everything inside these dependencies in the pom.xml file here. So this is the file which is usually present in the home directory, it's in the current directory, so that once the build is triggered, it will be picked up from that directory, and according to the steps, according to the content of the pom.xml file, the build will be processed or will be created here. Now what all included into the POM file here? So the different components which is included into the pom.xml file here is the dependencies, developers and contributors, plugins, plugin configuration, and resources. So these are the typical components which is a part of a pom.xml file, which can be same for a lot of projects. You can do some customization, and then the same POM file can be reused for the other projects also. Now, what are the minimum requirement of the elements which is there for a pom.xml file? So without which the pom.xml file will not be validated, and will be getting a kind of validation errors. So the minimum required elements are project root, model version, so it should be 4.0.0, the group ID of the project, the artifact ID of the project, and the version of the artifact. These are the minimum things which we want to define so that we can understand that what kind of artifact we are trying to prepare or we are trying to create here. So these are the minimum required elements which is required in the pom.xml file, without which the validation of the POM file will fail and the build will also fail here. Now, what exactly is the meant with the term called build tool? So build tool is an essential tool, is a kind of a process for building or compiling the source code here. So it's needed or it's required for the below generated processes. If you want to generate the source code, if you want to compile the source code, you want to generate the source code, you want to generate some documentation from the source code, you want to compile the source code, or you want to package the source code, whether it's a jar file, it's a war file, or it's a ER file. So whatever the packaging mode you want to select, you will be able to do it with the help of the particular build tool here. And if you feel that you want to upload these particular artifacts to the artifact tree, whether it's on remote machine or locally there, so that also you can do it with the help of this particular build tools here. So build tools can be helpful in doing a lot of activities for the developers. Now, what are the different steps which is involved to install Maven on Windows? Now, all you have to do is that you have to just first of all download the tar file from the Apache Maven repository there. Once that is done, so what happens that you have to set up some couple of environment variables. Now, if you download the Java JDK using the exe file, in that case the Java underscore home will be configured automatically. But if it is not available and you're not able to run the Java command line, in that case you have to set up the Java underscore home. And then similarly for Maven, you have to go for the Maven underscore home. That particular variable you have to configure. Now, once that is done, all you have to do is that you have to edit the path variable. So the bin directory of the Maven extracted folder, you have to put it up into the path variable. And once that is done, what will happen that you will be able to check the latest version, the version of the Maven over there. If it is like some old version, again you have to extract the latest version and do the steps all together again. So these are some of the ways that in which you can actually go for the installation or the configurations of Maven on the Windows platform. Now, what are the different steps which is involved for the installation of Maven on Ubuntu? So Ubuntu, it's fine. You just download the package of Java JDK there. Once the JDK is installed over there, what you can do, you can simply go ahead and say that, yes, I want to search for a particular Maven package which is available there. So once the JDK is installed, all you have to do is that you have to configure the Java underscore home, m3 underscore home, maven underscore home, and the path variable. Once all the path variables are something which is configured, then we will be able to check the latest version, like whether it's the version is correct, or we are getting the standard version over here or not over here. So that's the main mechanism, that how we will be able to configure the Maven on Ubuntu here. Now, what exactly is the command to install the jar into the local repository? Now, sometimes what happens that we are not able to fetch, like some dependency is not present on the particular central repository, Maven repository, or your Artifactory repository. In that case, you have some third-party jar which we want to install locally onto your repository. So in that case, we can go for the but we can download the jar file there, and then we can run the command called mvn install -file, and then we are giving the path like -d file, where the path of the file should be provided. Now, once that is done, so what will happen, that in the local .m2 directory, the specific artifact will be downloaded and will be installed there. So this is a mechanism where you will be able to configure, or you will be able to set up the artifacts locally, the jar file locally here in the local repository. So next question is that how do you know that the version of the Maven being used here? So the version of the Maven is pretty easy to calculate. So all you have to do is that you have to just go for mvn and space -- version. The moment you do that, it will let you know that what JDK or what Java version you are using, and it will also show you that what particular Maven version you're going to use here. So all that details you will be able to get with that particular command here. Now, what exactly is the clean, default, and write-in variable here? So these are the build cycles which is available there within Maven. So these are the built-in build cycles. So for clean, what happens that this life cycle will help you to perform the project cleaning. So usually during the build, there are some files which is created into the target directory. So the clean life cycle is essentially helping us to clean up all that directory, all that particular target directory. And when we talk about the specific default, so default lifecycle handles the project deployment. That is the default lifecycle. And site is something which is helpful for creating the site documentation. It's kind of a life cycle which is available there. So clean, default, and site are the different life cycles which can perform different kind of attributes or different tasks here. Next question: what exactly is a Maven repository? So Maven repository refers to the directories of the package jar files that contain metadata. Now the metadata refers to the POM files relevant to each project. So here you can able to get your artifacts stored there. You can download these artifacts also during the Maven build. If you put up that dependency, there are different kind of repositories which is available there. One is the local repository, one is the remote repository, and one is the central repository. So these are the different typical type of repositories which we have, where we can store the artifacts also, and from where we can download the artifacts also whenever required. Now the first one is the local repository. So local repository refers to the machine of the developers itself, where all the project related files are stored there. Now whenever we work on the particular Maven, so there is in the home directory .m2 folder is created. Now usually whatever the artifacts downloaded from Artifactory or from the Maven repository, it gets cached locally there. And once it is downloaded, next time it will not download the same artifacts or the same dependency altogether again. So this local repository is something which is available locally on the developer's machine only. So it contains all the dependent jars which a particular developer is downloading during the Maven build. Now remote repositories refers to the repository which is present on the server, and from where we will be downloading the particular dependencies. So when we are running the Maven build on a fresh machine, so usually over there the local repository does not exist. So in that case, what happens that the .m2 directory is empty. But the moment you run the build, what will happen that the artifacts or the dependencies will be downloaded from the remote repository, and once it is done, once it's downloaded, it will be added, or it will be downloaded, cached locally there, and it will be helpful in the future run. So that will be considered as a local repository, because all the artifacts, all the dependencies are downloaded there. And central repository is something which is known as the Maven community, where all the artifacts is available there. So usually we cache or we mirror these central repositories as our particular remote repositories, because it could be a possibility that these remote repositories are something which we are hosting into our organization, and central repository is something which is available centrally for everyone to use it. So these are something some kind of repositories where each and every artifacts will be stored, and anyone will be able to have the access to these particular artifacts here. So these artifacts are every open source artifacts is something which is available over there to these central repository. Now how does the Maven architecture really work here? So the Maven architecture really works in the 3 steps. The very first step is that it reads the pom.xml file here. That's the very first step. Second, it downloads the dependencies defined in the pom.xml file into the local repository from the central or the remote repository here. Once that is done, so it will create or generate the reports according to the life cycles which you have configured, whether it's a clean, install, cite, deploy, package, or whatever the life cycle you want to trigger. You will be triggering that particular life cycle, and corresponding to that the build or a specific task will be performed. So these are the 3 steps in which the overall build or any kind of execution of pom.xml file really happens here. Now what exactly is the Maven build lifecycle? So Maven lifecycle isn't nothing but collection of steps here that needs to be followed for doing a proper build of a project here. So there are primarily 3 built-in cycles which is available there. Default, which handles the project deployment; clean, which handles the project cleaning there; and cite, which handles the creation of the project sites documentation. So these are the 3 primary built-in build cycles, life cycles, which is available as such. Now, so build lifecycle has different kind of phases or the stages here, because in the previous particular slide we were talking about what are the different particular build life cycles which is available there. But these are the different phases, like what are the different step-by-step executions, like further deep down, which is available there inside a specific Maven build lifecycle. So here you can see that it's compile, then the test compile, test execution is there, then package, integration test, verify, install, and the lastly deploy here. So these are the different build phases which is available as such over here. So what exactly is the command to use to do a particular Maven site? So mvn site is something which is used to create a Maven site here. Now usually whatever the artifacts is prepared, that will be prepared in the target directory. So here also you will be able to see a site directory which is available there in the target directory, which you can refer for the site documentations. What is the different conventions used while naming a project in Maven? So usually it involves 3 components. So the full name of a project in Maven includes, first of all, the group ID. For example, com.apache, com.example. So these are some of the particular way that where you can provide the group ID. Artifact ID can be exact project name like Maven project or whatever the project you are creating. So sample project, example project. So these kind of things will be there in the artifact ID. And lastly is the version, like which version of your artifact you want to prepare, like 1.0.0 hyphen snapshot, 2.0.0. So like this information you are providing, that what particular version you are trying to configure here. Now let's move on to the intermediate level, where we will be having a little bit more complex questions related to the Maven here. Now what exactly is a Maven artifact? Now usually what happens that when we do a build process, as an end of result of the build process, we will get some artifacts. For example, when we build a .NET project, so there we will be able to have a exe or DLL files as an artifacts. Similarly, in case of Maven, when we do a build process, there we get the different kind of artifacts, like depending on the packaging mode, like jar file, var files, or the ER files here. So these are something which is getting generated during the build process, during the Maven process, and you can store them into your local repository, or you want to push them to the remote repository. It's something that totally depends on you. So Maven is a tool which can help you to create all the artifacts, whether it's a jar file, whether it's a var files, or whether it's a ER file here. And every artifact is having three attributes. The first one is the group ID, the artifact ID, and a particular version. And that's how you will be able to identify a full-fledged artifact as such in Maven. So Maven is not about only the name of the jar file. It's actually referring to the attributes like group ID, the artifact ID, and the version of the artifact here. Now, what are the different phases of the clean lifecycle here? So clean is something which is being used to clean the target directory so that a fresh build can be triggered there. So there are three steps: pre-clean, clean, and post-clean here. So if you wish that you want to override the particular lifecycle configurations and you want to run some particular steps before the clean activity, so you can do it into the pre-clean, and if you want to do it like some steps after clean, then post-clean can be utilized. Now, what are the different phases of the site lifecycle? So pre-site, site, post-site, and site deploy. So these are the different phases which is available there in the site lifecycle. What is exactly we meant by the Maven plugin? Now, this is the huge difference between the Ant and Maven here, because in Ant we were not having that much support of the plugins, and that's the reason why we had to deal with all the build configurations. So we have to simply put the overall build process, that how the build should be triggered, but that is not something which is there in case of Maven. In Maven we have a lot of flexibility because we can actually put up what exactly build configurations we want to put here. We can put some features like important features over here in Maven, and these plugins we can utilize. For example, I want to perform a compilation. Now, I don't really want to do any kind of configurations in this one. So what I can do is that I can simply use the compilation plugin in Maven, and that can really help me because I don't have to unnecessarily write or rewrite the configuration that how the compilation should be done. It's something which is pre-configured or pre-written in these plugins, that I can simply import the plugin and I can do the build process or the compilation process in a pretty standard mode. So I don't really have to do any kind of workarounds with that, and simply with a small automations I will be able to reach that how these Maven plugins can be integrated into my .xml file, and I can desire or I can have some particular procedures and some steps executed there. So that's the biggest benefit which we really get with the help of Maven plugins. Now, why exactly the Maven plugins are utilized? So to create a jar files, to create the var files, to compile the code files, to perform the unit testing, to create the project documentation, and to create the project reports. So there are a variety of things in which we can actually use these Maven plugins through the integrations within the .xml file there. So it's all about the plugins. You just import the plugin and that desired activity will be performed there. Now, what are the different type of plugins which is there? So you can have either a build projects. For performing the build activities, you can have some build plugins. For reporting plugins also there, which can be only generated or utilized to generate the reports, to process the reports, and do any kind of formatting or any kind of processing on the reports here. So that is where the reporting plugins are utilized. Now, what is exactly the difference between the convention and the configuration in Maven? So convention is in particular process when the developers are not required to create the build processes. So configuration is when the developers are supposed to create the build processes. So the users do not have to rectify the configuration in detail, and once the project is created, it will automatically create a structure. So there must specify every in case of configuration, you have to provide each and every details. So that's how the configurations really happens, because you have to put every detail into the .xml file, and that's how the particular configurations really work as such. So this is the huge difference between the conventions and the configurations here. Now, so why exactly is said that Maven uses conventions over the configurations? Maven pretty much does not put any efforts like on the particular developers that they have to put each and every configuration. So there are some ready-made plugins which is available there, and pretty much we are making use of that, so that in such a case we don't have to worry about the executions, and we will be able to pretty much work on that. So conventions, like Maven uses the conventions instead of the configurations, so the developers they don't just have to create the Maven project, should be doing the configuration work, and everything should be taken care in such a way that you just have to start the things, and rest of the things should be taken care by the Maven itself. So Maven will be responsible, because due to the plugins, it will be responsible to set up the default architecture, the default folder structures, and all you have to do is that you have to just place the source code in the desired folder structure here. So that's something which you need to do as a particular developers. So what exactly is the Maven order of inheritance here? So the order of inheritance is the settings, CLI parameters, parent POM, and the project POM, which means that if you have some configuration and settings, that will be the highest value, then the CLI parameters are there, then the parent POM is there, and then the project POM. So this is the way that how the particular parameters or the configurations will be picked up by the Maven. So that's the order. So what does the build life cycles and the phases imply in the basic concept of Maven? So build life cycles consist of a sequence of build phases, and each build phase consists of a sequence of goals. When a phase is run, all the goals related to that phase and its plugins are also compiled. So you will be able to have a lot of particular goals which is residing inside a phase there. And similarly, lifecycle is nothing but a kind of a sequence of the different phase. So lifecycle comes in the top, then it comes on the phases, and then it comes on the goals here. Now, what is the terminology called goal in case of Maven? The terminology goal refers to the specific task that makes it possible for the project to be built and organized. So it's something which we can run. So it's the actual implementation which is going on there. For example, in the build process, in the build phase, I have a different goals like clean, install, package, deploy. These are the different typical goals which is available there, which I can execute into the Maven here. So these are the different goals like which we can execute and which we can run during a Maven build. Next question is, what is exactly meant by the term dependencies and the repositories in Maven here? So dependencies refer to the Java libraries which we usually put up into the pound.xml file there. Now what happens that sometimes our source code is requiring some jar files like a secondary jar files for performing the build process. So instead of downloading it and storing it into the class path for during the build process, we just have to specify the dependency of that artifact, what dependency we need to put, and once that dependency is put up there, we will be able to have that jar file downloaded and cached into the local repository during the Maven build project. Now if the dependencies are not present in your local repository, then Maven will try to download it from the central repository, and again if it is not it's something which is available, which is downloaded from the central repository, then it will be cached locally into the local repository. So that's the cycle which is being implemented and utilized during this process. Now what exactly is a snapshot in Maven? So snapshot refers to the version already available in the Maven report repository. It signifies the latest development copy. That's what we do with the case of snapshot here. So Maven checks for a new version of snapshot in the remote repository for every new build. So during the build process, like a new snapshot version is being downloaded, and the snapshot is updated by the data service team, which with updated source code every time to the repository for each Maven build. So snapshot is something which we will be using like very frequently. We will be updating to that, and frequently we will be updating the version to that, and we will try to explore and we'll try to do the modifications. Now what are the different type of projects available in Maven? So there are thousands of Java projects which can be utilized or can be implemented by Maven here. So this helps the as the user that they no longer have to remember every configurations to set up particular project. For example, Spring Boot, Spring MVC, Spring Boot, etc. These are the different projects which is already available in Maven. So most of the we have already discussed that for the Java based projects, Maven is something which is considered as by default. So a lot of organizations are actually using it for storing or utilizing it for the particular Maven project. Now what exactly is the Maven archetype over here? So Maven archetype refers to a Maven plugin that is entitled to create a project structure as per its template. These archetypes are just project templates that are generated by Maven when any new project is created there. So this is something which we are using so that we will be able to create a fresh new projects. Right. So let's go on to the advanced level of this Maven questions. Now what exactly is the command to create a new project based on an archetype type? So MVN archetype generate is used to create a new Java project based on the archetype. Now this will take up some parameters from as an end user from you, and depending on that parameters, it will create the pom.xml file, it will create the source directories, inside that main, Java, test, all these different couple of directory structures will be automatically created. Now why we require this command? So that if you are going to create a project from scratch from the day one, this command will help you to have all the folder structures created, and then further on you can put up your source code and those files as such in this folder structure. So that's how is the mechanism that we will be able to see that how the setup can be performed really over here. Now what does Maven Clean implies? Now Maven Clean is a plugin that suggests that it's going to clean the files and directories there. So whenever we do a build process, usually in the target directory we have some class files, some jar files, or whatever the generated source code which is available, that will be present in the target directory. So the Maven Clean is something which is available, which is going to clean all these directories. And why we are doing this directory structure cleanup? So that we will be able to do a fresh build process, and there should not be any kind of issues as such over here. So that's the main reason why we are looking forward for this particular mechanism, or for this particular changes as such here. Now, so what exactly is a build profile all about? So build profiles refers to the set of configurations where we can have like typically two different kind of build processes there. So if you feel that the same pom.xml file you can you want to run for different particular configurations, so that you will be able to do pretty much with the help of this component. So build profile is used to do a customization processes, so that you will be able to have the process, and you will be able to perform the configurations and the setups all together there. So that's a very important aspect to be considered, that which we need to discuss when we talk about the build profile. So build profile, whenever you feel that you want to do some customizations and you want to proceed with the setup, so that's where it's utilized. Next thing is that what are different type of build profiles which is available there. So the build profiles can be done on for a particular project, like per project you can do. You can even do the build profiles in the settings.xml file also, and if you feel that you want to do it into the global settings.xml file, so that also you can do as such over here. So there are different ways in which you can do the customization, and once the customization is done, you will be able to have the different ways of doing the setups and the configurations over there. So what exactly is meant by the particular system dependencies here? So let's talk about that also. So system dependencies refers to the particular mechanisms where we feel that how the dependencies should be present there. So that is something which is having a scope of system there. So these dependencies are commonly used to help Maven know the dependencies that is being provided by the JDK. System dependencies are mostly used to resolve the dependencies on the artifacts that are provided by the JDK. So these dependencies are somewhat which is being utilized and used over here, so that we will be able to implement and go ahead through the system dependencies. What is the reason for using an optional dependency here? So optional dependencies are used to decrease the transitive burden of some libraries. So what happens that when you download an artifact, when you put up a dependency, so it could be a possibility that some dependencies as in particular optional can also be downloaded. Now these are not always required, but yes, sometimes what happens that these are downloaded so that you don't have to put each and every artifact or dependency into the pom.xml file. For example, you're trying to download some Apache tool, and with that some like 3-4 jar files or 3-4 another dependencies are also getting downloaded. Now if you are using that dependencies, that totally great, because you don't have to put that list or that entry in the dependency list in the pom.xml file, and that can really save your time. But if you feel that you don't want to have them, and these are the optional ones, and you really want to get rid of that, so that also you can exclude while downloading any kind of dependency. So these are the optional ones which, depending on your requirement, you can utilize, you can process, and if you feel that you don't want to get it, you won't want to process it, you can simply ignore it and you can get rid of that also. Now what is a dependency scope, and how many type of dependency scope are there? So there are different type of dependency scopes which is there, which is used on each and every stage of the build here. So compile, provided, runtime, test, system, import. These are the different kind of dependency scopes which we have, using which we can define that when exactly we want to go ahead for a specific build process. So depending on your requirement, you can explore all these build scopes and you can get benefits out of that. What is exactly an transitive dependency in Maven? So Maven avoids the need to find out and specify libraries that our own dependencies require by including the transitive dependencies automatically. So transitive dependencies says that if X depends on Y and Y depends on Z, then X depends on Y and both there. So which means that you are not dependent on one artifact, you also need the Z artifact there with the Y artifact. So that is what you need to do so that you will get both the dependencies there, because this is normal that if you are trying to download some particular artifacts or download some dependency, and that dependency is also dependent on some other artifact or some other jar file, then you have to include both of them. So this is something which you will be able to get so that you can easily download all these dependent jar files also, and the Maven build can be success. How can a Maven build profile can be activated? So Maven build profile can be activated through different ways. So explicitly using the command line, you can talk about that which profile you want to execute. Through Maven settings, you can do based on environment parameters, OS settings, and present and missing files. So these are the different ways in which you can actually activate that which particular profile you want to have. So profiles configurations can also be saved in various situations and various files, and from there you will be able to refer that which file you want to refer as such. Now, what is meant by the dependency exclusion? The exclusion is used to exclude any transitive dependency, because you never know that if you are trying to put up a dependency entry in the .xml file, that artifact is also further dependent on another artifact. So in order to see that you want to exclude that dependent artifact which is being automatically downloaded, that also we can exclude with the help of exclusion. So you can avoid the transitive dependency with the help of dependency exclusions here. So what exactly is in Mojo? So Mojo is nothing but Maven plain old Java object here. So it's an executable goal in Maven, and a plugin refer to the distribution of such Mojos. So Mojos enable the Maven to extend its functionality that already is not founded in it. So it's kind of an extension which is there, and using this we can get some additional benefits and some executions over there. So what is the command to create a new project based on a hard drive? So again, archetype is something which we normally use to create the new projects. Now you can give the parameters in the command itself, or you want it to in kind of an interactive mode where it will take the parameters from the end user, and according to that the project will be created onto hard drive or onto server, wherever you wish you want to create, you can create a new project. So explain about the Maven settings.xml file. So Maven settings.xml file contains the elements that are used to define that how the Maven execution should be there. So there are different settings like local, remote, central, all these different repositories are configured as such over here. Now in this case, what happens that usually the configurations are done in such a way that it can go for the executions, it can go for the build process, and the complete executions can be involved and can be achieved as such here. So all these executions are something which we can really perform, and here we can put some credentials, how to connect to the remote repository, how to connect to remote repository. All that stuff is something which we talk about over here. What exactly is meant by term super POM here? So super POM refers to the default POM of Maven. So the POMs of Maven can derive from, so it's nothing but a reference to a parent POM which is available there, that is a super POM. So if you define some dependencies in that super POM, automatically the child POM will also be able to inherit all those dependencies. So we can put some executions like we can put some configuration in the super POM, so that if multiple projects are going to refer that, they should be able to refer that easily. So that's the reason why we primarily use the super POM, so that we can have the execution, some processes put up over there, and all the other projects should be able to refer or inherit from there. So where exactly the dependencies are stored? So dependencies are stored like in different locations, like you have the local repository, remote repository is there. Local repository is on the local developer's machine, and remote repository is something which is available on a server in form of Artifactory.
In this session, we shall make sure that you get to know about all the important Selenium interview questions that you might be asked in your upcoming Selenium interview. Selenium tester or Selenium developer is one of the most popular jobs in DevOps domain. According to iData Labs, a research company which uses data to provide industry insights, found that nearly 31% of software testing tools market belonged to Selenium in the year 2018. The stats tell a lot about how preferred Selenium is all across the world. Selenium skills are highly in demand as the automation testing market goes on increasing. Professionals with these skills are hard to find, so there are ample amount of jobs in the market for skilled candidates. Companies are even willing to go beyond the industry norms for compensating their Selenium testers, provided they have the required certifications and experience. The median salary of Selenium testers in the UK currently falls in the range of £40,000 per annum to £65,000 per annum. The average salary of a Selenium automation tester in the US is around $97,500 per annum. If we talk concerning India, the average salary of a Selenium tester is 19 lakhs per annum, and the salary of a Selenium professional falls between 1 million per annum to 4.2 million rupees per annum. This variation in salary depends on various factors such as job location, experience, education, employer, certifications, and many more. The salary trends give a great idea of what you can expect from the career. So now when we know at what great height is the demand of Selenium in the market, let's go on and check the top 50 Selenium interview questions. But before we begin, make sure that you have subscribed to our YouTube channel and hit that bell icon so that you can never miss an update from Simplilearn. We have divided the questions into 3 parts depending on the level of difficulty. Okay, without further ado, let's get started with our first part, that is the beginner level interview questions. So the first question is, what is the main purpose of Selenium? So the answer for this question is, Selenium is an open source automated testing tool used to test web applications across various browsers. Desktop and mobile apps cannot be tested using Selenium. However, other tools like HP's QTP and Appium can be used to test software and mobile applications. It is a cloud-based testing platform that allows testers to record their actions and export them. Selenium enables parallel test execution, which increases the efficiency of tests. Selenium can test web applications against browsers like Firefox, Opera, Chrome, and Safari, to name a few. The test code can be written in various programming languages like Java, Perl, Python, and PHP. Selenium is platform independent and can be deployed on different operating systems like Windows, Linux, and Macintosh. Selenium can be integrated with third-party software tools like JUnit and TestNG for test management. Selenium is not just a single tool but a suite of software, each with different approach to support automation testing. It comprises of 4 major components which include Selenium Integrated Development Enterprise, Selenium Remote Control, now deprecated, WebDriver, and finally Selenium Grid. Now moving on to the next question. What do you understand by automation testing? Automation testing uses automation tools to write and execute test cases. In this case, no manual involvement is needed for executing an automated test suite. Testers prefer automation tools to write test scripts and test cases and then group them into test suites. Automation testing enables the use of specialized tools to automate the execution of manually designed test cases without any human intervention. Automation testing tools may access the test data, control the execution of tests, and compare the actual result against the expected result, and finally, generating detailed test reports of the system under test. Now, the third question is, what are the advantages of automation testing? This is one of the most asked interview questions in any automation testing job. Some of the advantages of automation testing are: The tool supports both performance and functional testing. It supports the execution of parallel test cases. It enables parallel execution in the combination of different operating systems and browser environments. There is minimal manual intervention and test scripts can be run unattended. This reduces the chances of human errors. There is reusability of code, that is, create one time and execute multiple times with less or no maintenance. Automation testing saves time and money and is faster in execution. In automation testing, there are easy reporting, which means it generates automatic reports after execution. It is easy for compatibility testing and is cheaper compared to manual testing in the long run. Automated testing is more reliable, more powerful, and versatile. Automation tools allow us to integrate with cross-browser testing tools, Jenkins, GitHub, etc. It is mostly used for regression testing and supports execution of repeated test cases. Now moving on to the fourth question. What is the difference between Selenium 2.0 and Selenium 3.0? Selenium 2 is nothing but integration of WebDriver with Selenium RC or Selenium 1. Selenium 1 is a well-established framework that supports various browsers due to its JavaScript implementation. The strengths of both the Selenium WebDriver and Selenium 1 are combined in Selenium 2, which makes it obvious that the drawbacks were earlier there will no longer be there in 2.0. On the other hand, in the case of Selenium 3.0, Selenium 3.0 can be referred to as an extended version of Selenium 2.0, solving bugs and increasing stability. The big chance in the Selenium 3.0 is the core being replaced by backend WebDriver. It won't be wrong to say that Selenium 3 would be majorly be the choice of software testing tool for both web and mobile-based applications. Now moving ahead onto the fifth question. What are the testing types supported by Selenium? So the answer for this question is testing types that can be supported by Selenium are as follows: functional testing, regression testing, retesting, acceptance testing, end-to-end testing, smoke testing, sanity testing, responsive testing, cross-browser testing, UI testing, integration testing, and many more. Moving on to the next question. What are the different Selenium suite components? So the answer for this question is there are 4 components in Selenium suite. First is the Selenium Remote Control or Selenium RC. Selenium Remote Control enables the writing of automated web applications in languages such as Java, C#, etc. It is hardly in use today as the WebDriver offers more powerful functionalities. The second is the Selenium Grid. Selenium Grid enables the running of tests in parallel on several machines. The commands are routed to the remote web browser instances and one server acts as the hub. The hub is responsible for conducting several tests on multiple machines. The third is the Selenium IDE. Selenium IDE needs no additional setup except installing the extension on your browser. The IDE makes the test debugging easier with features like setting breakpoints and pausing exceptions. And the last and the fourth tool in the suite is Selenium WebDriver. Selenium WebDriver is the most critical component of the Selenium tool suite that allows cross-browser compatibility testing. The WebDriver supports various operating systems like Windows, Mac, Linux, Unix, etc. Now let's go on further and check the next question. What are the different programming languages, browsers, and operating systems supported by Selenium? So the answer for this question is Selenium supports various programming languages to write test code with language-specific drivers that offer commands from the Selenium API. The common languages used by testers to write Selenium code are C#, Java, Perl, PHP, Python, and Ruby. Java is the favorite language for use with Selenium 1 and 2, but the ease of using Python and Ruby has led to many testers opting for these languages as well. So moving on to the next part of the question, which deals with the browsers supported by Selenium. The main reason for Selenium's popularity is the wide and comprehensive list of features available on the platform. With Selenium, test execution remains seamless on just about all available web browsers. To name a few, we have Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, Internet Explorer, Opera, Safari, and Edge. So now let's talk with respect to operating systems that could be integrated with Selenium. Selenium enables creating and testing suites on any platform and executing their test cases on different one. For example, the tester could write test cases using Windows operating system and then run them on a Linux-based operating system. So, to name a few, Selenium can support Android, iOS, Windows, Linux, Mac, and Solaris. Now let's go on and see the next question. What are the advantages of WebDriver over Selenium RC? So the answer for this question is WebDriver is faster in comparison to Selenium RC because of its simple architecture. The WebDriver can directly communicate to the browser while Selenium RC needs the RC servers to help to do so. WebDriver API is more concise than Selenium RC and can support HTML unit while Selenium RC cannot. Selenium WebDriver tool is used for automating web application testing to verify that it works as expected or not. It mainly supports browsers like Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and Internet Explorer. It also permits you to execute cross-browser testing. The next question here is, why testers choose Selenium over QTP? So the answer for this question is, Selenium is an open source tool and it is specifically designed to test web-based applications. In Selenium, we can execute tests when a browser is minimized, whereas in QTP, we need to have an application under test to be visible on the desktop. In Selenium, multiple cases can be executed in parallel, unlike QTP, where we can execute only one test at a time. There are several browsers supported by Selenium, while QTP just supports Internet Explorers on Windows. Selenium supports mobile devices like Android, iPhone, BlackBerry, Headless WebKit, whereas on the other hand, QTP uses a commercial product for mobile app test automation, that is HP UFT Mobile. Selenium supports different programming languages while QTP supports only Visual Basic Script, and also Selenium has zero maintenance cost as it is open source, whereas QTP has a license and annual maintenance charges. So now these were the few reasons why testers mainly choose Selenium over QTP. Now moving ahead into our next question, what is the use of XPath? So the answer for this question is, XPath is a Selenium technique used to navigate through the HTML structure of a web page. It uses a non-XML syntax to provide a way of pointing to different parts of an XML document. It can also be used to test addressed nodes within a document to determine whether they match a pattern or not. While other locators in Selenium that search for elements using tags or CSS class names are simpler to use, they may not be sufficient to select all DOM elements of the HTML document. The primary purpose of XPath is to address parts of the XML document. Now moving on to the next question, how can you locate a web element in Selenium? So the answer is, Selenium uses locators to locate and identify web elements. There are different types of locators in Selenium. Some of the locators are mentioned here. The first type of XPath locator is the ID. The best and the most popular method to identify web elements is to use ID, and obviously each element's ID is definitely unique. The second type is the class name. In this case, the class name of the element is used to find the element. The third type is the link test, where the text of the link is used to find the element. All the hyperlinks on a web page can be identified using link text. The links on the web page can be determined with the help of anchor tag. The anchor tag is used to create the hyperlinks on the web page, and the text between the opening and closing of anchor tags constitutes the link text. Then comes the XPath locator that uses the name of the element to find that particular element. The other type of XPath locator is the XPath. This required to find the dynamic element and to traverse between different elements of the web page. The last type of XPath locator is the CSS path. It locates the elements to have no class, name, or ID. Now moving ahead into the next question. Name the different types of WebDriver APIs. So the answer for this question is the WebDriver API refers to the standard that abstracts out the device or browser-specific bindings from the developer so that the test script can be written in any programming language and run on many different browsers via a WebDriver. The different types of WebDriver API in Selenium are Android driver, Chrome driver, Event Firing WebDriver, Firefox driver, HTML unit driver, Internet Explorer driver, iPhone simulator driver, remote web driver. Now moving ahead into the next question. What does a slash signify in XPath? And what is the difference between single and double slash? The answer for this question is the XPath syntaxes are path expressions that are used for addressing into a document. Slashes are used to create XPath with an absolute or relative path. XPath uses path expressions to select nodes in an XML document. There are two cases. One is the single slash where the other is the double slash. Single slash creates XPath with an absolute path, which means that the XPath would be made to begin selecting from the start node. Double slash on the other hand creates XPath with a relative path, which means that XPath would be made to begin selecting from anywhere in the document. Now moving on to the next question. Explain absolute XPath and relative XPath. So the answer for this question is absolute XPath starts from the root node and ends at the desired descendant elements node. It starts with the top HTML node and ends with the input node. It starts with a single forward slash as we discussed in the previous question. While on the other hand, the relative XPath begins from the middle of the HTML DOM structure. Relative XPath starts from any node in between the HTML page and the current elements node, and it starts with a double forward slash. Then the other point of consideration is the difference in the drawback in the case of absolute XPath is that if there are any changes in the elements path, then XPath will fail. And in the case of relative XPath, it enables writing from the middle of the HTML DOM structure without any need to write the long XPath. We can see the syntax of the two absolute XPath and relative XPath on screen, and we can notice the difference in the slashes in case of both of them. Now moving on to the next question. Name some automation tools that can be integrated with Selenium to achieve continuous testing. Selenium can be integrated with several automation tools. Some of them are Maven, Jenkins, Docker, TestNG, JUnit, iPhone driver, iPhone simulator driver, remote web driver. Now moving on to the next question. Differentiate between verify and asset commands. Assets and verify methods are commonly used in Selenium for verifying or validating applications. If the asset condition is true, then the program control will execute the next step, but if the condition is false, then the execution will stop and further test steps will not be executed. Whereas in the verifying condition, there won't be any pause in the test execution even though the verify condition is true or false. There are two different types of assets, the hard asset and the soft asset, while there are no categories in case of verification. The hard asset condition throws an exception immediately after the asset fails and carries out with the next case of the suit. On the other hand, while the soft asset condition does not throw an exception immediately when the assertion fails, collects them and carries out with the next validation. Now moving on to the next question. What are the different types of JUnit annotations which are used in Selenium? JUnit annotation is a special form of syntactic metadata that could be added to Java source code for better code readability and structure. Annotations were introduced in JUnit 4, which makes the Java code more readable and simple. The different types of JUnit annotations are test, before, after class, after class, ignore, run with. Now the next question in the docket is, how is TestNG better than JUnit? TestNG and JUnit are both open source frameworks supported by Selenium WebDriver. TestNG is a testing framework based on JUnit and NUnit to simplify a broad range of testing needs from unit testing to integration testing. There are more functionalities added to TestNG, which makes it more powerful than JUnit. TestNG enables dependency testing, which isn't there in JUnit. Now moving on to the next question. What are the different types of Selenium frameworks? The Selenium framework is what makes code maintenance easy and efficient. Without frameworks, users might place the code and data simultaneously, which is neither reusable nor readable. There are beneficial outcomes of frameworks like increased code reusability, higher portability, reduced script maintenance cost, better code readability, and many more. There are three types of frameworks created by Selenium WebDriver to automate manual test cases. The first type is data-driven. The data-driven framework in Selenium refers to the method of separating datasets from the test case. Then, the second framework is the keyword-driven framework. This framework is a method used for speeding up automated testing by separating keywords for common sets of functions and instructions. Then the third framework is the hybrid framework, where we utilize the advantages of both the keyword-driven framework as well as data-driven framework. Now let's move on to the next question. What is data-driven and keyword-driven? Data-driven framework is based on several datasets generated in external file and then imported to the automation testing tool. Hence, test data is generated from external files like Excel, CSV, or XML. The datasets are separate from the original script from which the required input may be fetched. Let's check on what is keyword-driven framework now. The idea behind the keyword-driven approach in automation is to separate the coding from the test case and test step. This helps a non-technical person to understand the automation very well. The instructions required to perform the operation are written in an external file like Excel sheet, which keeps most of the data, and keyword-driven, which is needed for the test like test case, test steps, test objects, and actions. The functionalities to be tested can be easily controlled by the users. So this was all about the beginner's level of interview questions. Now let's go on further and check some intermediate level of interview questions that might help you take a step further in your preparation. Now the 21st question is, what is Selenium WebDriver? So the answer for this question is, Selenium WebDriver is the most important component of the Selenium tool suite. The WebDriver allows cross-browser compatibility testing and supports various operating systems like Windows, Mac, Linux, Unix, and etc. It also provides compatibility with a range of languages including Python, Java, Perl, Ruby, etc. The WebDriver provides support for many different browsers like Chrome, Firefox, Opera, etc. and provides faster execution of the test scripts compared to other tools. The next question is, what is the need of Selenium WebDriver? So the answer for this question is, Selenium WebDriver provides a very user-friendly interface that could be easily understood. WebDriver is a programming interface that helps create and run test cases. It makes provision to act on web elements. The WebDriver has many other features in comparison to Selenium RC and Selenium IDE. Now moving on to the next question. How is the Selenium WebDriver different from Selenium RC and Selenium IDE? Selenium WebDriver is an open source collection of APIs which is used to test web applications. The Selenium WebDriver tool is used for automating web application testing to verify that it works as expected or not. Unlike the Selenium IDE, Selenium WebDriver can work with many different browsers. Then, the WebDriver does not require the user to start the server as in case of Selenium RC. Selenium WebDriver is an API and not a graphical user interface based plugin or a standalone Java application. In Selenium WebDriver, all the APIs are entirely object-oriented in nature. Unlike the other tool, in addition to that, Selenium WebDriver supports listeners, otherwise whose implementation is not supported. The WebDriver also supports iOS and Android testing, which is not supported by RC and IDE. Now let's move on to the next question. What is the architecture of Selenium WebDriver? Selenium WebDriver architecture in a simplified diagram is shown on the screen. Selenium WebDriver API enables interaction between browsers and browser drivers. This architecture consists of 4 layers, namely the Selenium language bindings, JSON wire protocol, browser drivers, and real drivers. Selenium language bindings consists of languages like Java, Ruby, Python, C#, and so on. After the test cases are triggered, entire Selenium code will be converted to JSON format. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It takes up the task of transferring information from the server to the client. JSON wire protocol is primarily responsible for the transfer of data between HTTP servers. Generated JSON is made available to browser drivers through HTTP protocol. Each browser has a specific browser driver. Browser drivers interact with their respective browsers and execute the commands by interpreting JSON received from the browser. As soon as the browser driver gets any instructions, they run them on the real driver or browsers. The response is given back in the form of the HTTP response. Moving forward to the next question, that is the 25th question. What are the drawbacks of Selenium WebDriver? Selenium WebDriver does not support testing for desktop applications. It requires the expertise of team and resources to manage. No inbuilt reporting capability. Test reports are generated with the help of plugins like JUnit and TestNG, and also requires a lot of maintenance, and it is difficult to scale. If you want to get the technical issues resolved, one must trust the community forums. In Selenium WebDriver, testing of images is not possible. For testing of images, integration of Selenium with Sikali is needed. The next question is, how does Selenium Grid works? So the answer for this question is, Selenium Grid is a smart proxy server that makes it easy to run tests in parallel on multiple machines. This is done by routing commands to remote web browser instances where one server acts as the hub. The hub is responsible for conducting several tests on multiple machines. Now moving on to the next question. What are some of the common exceptions in Selenium WebDriver? The answer is, automation code execution usually may not carry out as expected due to many factors involved in execution such as network stability issues, internet issues, server stability, etc. We might get exceptions due to insufficient waiting time or incorrect syntaxes, parameters, etc. Some of the most common exceptions are no such element exception, no Windows exception, no such frames exception, no alert present exception, invalid selector exception, element not visible exception, element not selectable exception, timeout exception, no such session exception. Now moving on to the next question. What is the difference between type and type and wait command? So the answer for this question is, the two commands type and type and wait command have their own specific purpose. The purpose of type command is to type keyboard key values in the text box. The command can be used to select the value of combo box, whereas the type and wait command is used when the typing is completed
and the web page starts loading. The command waits for the software application page to reload. Now the next question. What is the difference between find element and find elements in Selenium? Here, the find element command is used to identify a web element within a web page. It returns the first web element that matches the search in case there are multiple elements and throws an exception called no such elements exception if the element is not found. Whereas the find elements command is used to identify a list of web elements within a page. It returns the list of elements that match more than one element and does not throw an exception, but returns an empty list if there are no matching elements. Now moving on to the next question. What is meant by wait in Selenium? How many types of waits are there in Selenium? The wait functions are very essential when it comes to executing Selenium tests. They help in observing and troubleshooting the issues that may occur due to variation in long time. In automation testing, wait commands direct the test execution to pause for a certain length of time before moving on to the next step. There are two types of wait commands. They are the implicit wait and the explicit wait. First, we will learn the implicit wait. Implicit waits tell the WebDriver to wait for a certain amount of time before it throws an exception. Once we set the time, WebDriver will wait for the element based on the time we set before it throws an exception. The default setting is 0. We need to set some wait time to make WebDriver to wait for a required time. Now we will learn about the explicit wait. The explicit wait in Selenium is used to tell the WebDriver to wait for a certain condition or maximum time exceeded before throwing an exception, that is the element not visible exception. Moving on to the next question. What is the biggest disadvantage of implicit wait? The main disadvantage of the implicit wait is that it slows down the test performance. WebDriver will wait for some specific amount of time before it throws an exception. For example, if you set the waiting time to be 10 seconds and the elements appear in the DOM in 11 seconds, your test will fail because you're told to wait for a maximum of 10 seconds only. Now moving on to the next question. What are the type of navigation commands? So the different types of navigation commands are the first one, driver.navigate to URL. This navigates to the provided URL. Then comes driver.navigate.refresh. This method refreshes the current page. The third command is the driver.navigate.forward. This method does the same operation as clicking on forward button of any browser. It neither accepts nor returns anything. Last navigation command is the driver.navigate.back. This method does the same operation as clicking on the back button of any browser. It neither accepts nor returns anything. Moving on to the next question. What is meant by same origin policy and how is it handled? Same origin policy is a feature taken for security purposes. According to this policy, a web browser enables the access of scripts from one web page to the other if both the pages have the same origin. The origin policy protects a malicious script on one page to access sensitive data on another. Followed by this, we have the next question. What is Selenium and how is it classified? Selenium is a set of Selenium commands which are used to test your web application. Testers can test the broken links, the existence of some objects on the UI, Ajax functionality, alerts on window, list options, and a lot more using Selenium. Selenium commands tells the Selenium automation engine to perform certain tasks. Selenium can be classified into a set of three types of commands, which are action, accessors, and assertions. Moving ahead, we have the 35th question. What is the difference between driver.close method and driver.quit method? So the answer for this question is the driver.close command is used to close the current browser window. If there are multiple windows open on the screen, then the one on focus will be closed, whereas the driver.quit command is also used for the same purpose. If there are multiple browser windows open on the screen, then the command closes all of them at once. Moving ahead, we have the advanced level of interview questions. Now we are done with the intermediate level of Selenium interview questions. Let's now buckle up a little more and learn the advanced level of interview questions. The first question in this category is, how do you type text in an input box using Selenium? The method used to type text in input boxes is send keys. The send keys method allows typing automatically into an editable field during the execution of any tests. These fields are web elements that can be identified using locators like element ID, name, class name, etc. Now moving on to the next question, how to click on a hyperlink in Selenium. The command used to click on the hyperlink uses link text to find the element. The command finds the element using link text and then clicks on the element, whereafter the user would be redirected to the corresponding page. You can find the syntax of the command on the screen. Moving on to the next question, how to scroll down a page using JavaScript. The method used to scroll down to a page is scroll by. We can see the syntaxes of a set of commands. The first syntax, that is the execute script here, is the general syntax for scroll by command. Then the second syntax of JavaScript executor is create a JavaScript object. Then the third syntax, driver.get, is the syntax of launching the desired application. Then the last syntax, that is the js.execute script, is for the scroll down to the desired location. Moving forward, we have the next question. What is the way of typing in a text box without using send keys? The text can be entered into a text box by using JavaScript executor. The commands that could be used for the process can be seen on the screen. You can use JavaScript executor and jsa.execute script for the work to be done. Now moving forward, we have the next question. How to select a value from a drop-down in Selenium WebDriver. For selecting and deselecting from a drop-down in Selenium WebDriver, select class is used. The objects of select type can be initialized by passing the drop-down web element as a parameter to its constructor. The syntax of the commands can be seen on the screen. The web element test drop command and the command to select the drop-down. Here, the WebDriver offers three ways to select from a drop-down box. The first way is to select by index, that is, the selection is based on index starting from 0. Then comes select by value, that is, selection based on value. The last way is select by visual text, that is, selection of option that displays text matching the given argument. The next question is, what is the use of switch to command? The answer for this question is, the switch to command is used to switch between windows, frames or pop-ups within the application. Every window instantiated by the WebDriver is given a unique alphanumeric value called window handle. We can see the syntax of commands on the screen. The first command, that is the string handle command, is used to get the window handle of the window you wish to switch to, and then the driver.switch to command is used to switch to the desired window. The next question is, what is meant by object repository in Selenium WebDriver? An object repository is a common storage location for all objects. If we talk in the context of Selenium WebDriver, these objects would typically be the locators used to identify web elements uniquely. For example, if there is a chance in one web element's locator value, then only the object repository has to be changed instead of all the test cases. The object repositories have to be built in Selenium WebDriver using the key value pair approach. The two types of object repositories may be created in Selenium WebDriver are, the first one, object repository using properties file, and the next one, object repository in XML. Moving ahead, we have the 43rd question, how to upload a file in Selenium WebDriver. To upload a file in Selenium WebDriver, the send keys or robot class method are used. The initial step is to first locate the text box and then set the file path using send keys method and click on submit. The syntax for the command can be seen on the screen. The first syntax of the web element command is used to locate the browse button. Then the second syntax of the browse.sendKeys is used to pass the file path to be uploaded using sendKeys method. Moving on to the next question, what is the way to set browser window size in Selenium? So the answer for this question is, the window size can be maximized, set or resized. To maximize the window, we use the driver.manage.window.maximize method or command. And then to set the window size, we can use dimension d is equals to new dimension, wherein the brackets we give the dimensions we want to set the size. Now moving on to the next question, how can you debug tests in Selenium IDE? The steps to debug the tests in Selenium IDE are, the first step is to insert a breakpoint from the place you want to execute your test. Then execute the test case. After the test case has started executing, the execution will pause at the breakpoint. Then click on the blue button with the next statement to continue, and finally click on the run button to execute all the commands. Moving ahead, we have the next question. How to insert a breakpoint in Selenium IDE? The steps to insert a breakpoint in Selenium IDE are, the first step is to go into the Selenium IDE, right-click on the command and select toggle breakpoint. Then select the command and press the B key on the keyboard. Post that, to clear the breakpoint, press B key again. And multiple breakpoints can be set up in the Selenium IDE. Moving forward, we have the next question. What is a pause on an exception in Selenium IDE? So the answer for this question is, the pause on an exception is a feature that is used to handle exceptions in Selenium IDE. The feature can be used by clicking on the pause button on the right top corner of the IDE window. The execution stops when an exception is encountered and the script enters to the debug mode, so the entire test does not fail and the error can be resolved. Moving forward, we have the 48th question. What can result in the failure of Selenium IDE? So the answer for this question is, Selenium IDE is one of the most accessible record and play tools in the Selenium tool suite, which requires no particular setup. The Selenium IDE comes with a very rich set of commands powered by Selenium and allows us to record and test different web application interactions with the browser. But then there are certain times when the Selenium IDE might fail. Some of those instances are when Selenium cannot locate the element if the locator has changed. Then one more such instance is when the element to be accessed cannot be found on the web page and operation is timed out. And one more case is when the element being tried to access is not created. For finding if the link is broken or working fine, we use the driver.get method. When we use driver.get method to navigate to a URL, it will respond with a status of 200 OK. 200 OK denotes that the link is working and it has been obtained. If any other status is obtained, then it indicates that the link is broken. Some of the HTTP status codes are 200, that indicates it's a valid link. 404 indicates link not found. 400 indicates bad request. 401 indicates unauthorized. And finally 500, that indicates internal error. And now we are at the last question. How to log into any site if it is showing an authentication pop-up for username and password? So the answer for this question is, to handle authentication pop-ups, we need to verify its appearance and then handle them using an explicit wait command. The syntax of the explicit wait command to be used is on the screen. That is, the first syntax, WebDriver wait syntax. The second syntax is the alert equals to wait dot until refers to the use of alert class to verify the alert. And the last syntax is alert.authenticate, that is there to provide the credentials after the verification in the previous step.
Welcome to this video on the interview questions of configuration management tools, Chef, Ansible and Puppet. Chef is a configuration management tool written in Ruby and Erlang, which provides continuous deployment, increases system robustness, and provides cloud integration. Ansible is another open source software tool for provisioning, configuration management, and application deployment. And Puppet is a configuration management tool that can also be used as a deployment tool and implements infrastructure as a code. In this video, we have compiled the most important interview questions of configuration management tools, Chef, Ansible, and Puppet that you might face in a DevOps interview. So without further ado, let's get started.
So let's just get into the first section, which is configuration management. So one of the questions that you'll get asked right away is, why do you have SSL certificates used for Chef? Really fundamentally, your immediate answer should be security. SSL provides for a very high level of private security and private and public key pairing. This really is essential to ensure that you have a secure environment throughout your entire network. The second part should be that if you're using SSL and you're using the private public key model within SSL, you're able to guarantee the systems on your network that the Chef, that you'll be able to validate that the nodes within your network that Chef is validating against actually are the real nodes themselves, not imposters. So you will also be asked some questions such as the following. Which of the following commands would you use to stop or disable the HTTP service when the system boots? And you'll typically get 4 responses, and there'll be hashtag systemctl disable httpd.service, or is it system disable http.service, system disable httpd, or the final option, which is systemctl disable httpd.service. Your answer should be the first one, which is hashtag systemctl disable http.service. So Chef comes with a series of tools that allow it to function effectively. And one of the tools that you're going to be asked about is, what is Test Kitchen? And Test Kitchen is essentially a command line tool that allows you to be able to test out your cookbook before you actually deploy it to a real node. So some of the commands that you would use are, for instance, if you want to create an instance of Test Kitchen, you would do kitchen create. If you want to destroy an instance after you created it, you do kitchen destroy. And if you want to be able to combine multiple instances, you would do kitchen converge. So a question you'll get is around Chef is, how does Chef Apply differ from Chef Client? So fundamentally, the difference between them is that Chef Apply will validate the recipe that you're working on, whereas Chef Client looks to apply and validate the entire cookbook that's run in your server environment. So one is focused on the recipe and the other is focused on the entire cookbook. So there are some differences when you're working with different command lines. So for instance, when you're working with Puppet and you're working with one version of Puppet and you want to do, what is the command to sign a requested certificate? The top example here is for Puppet version 2.7, whereas the lower option here is for Puppet version 3. And that's something to bear in mind when you're going through your interview process, is that the tools that are used within a continuous integration, continuous delivery DevOps model do vary. And so you want to be able to talk knowledgeably about the different versions of the tools so that when you're talking to your interviewer, you're able to show the deep knowledge that you have. Which open source or community tools do you use to make Puppet more powerful? And essentially this question is going to be asking you to look beyond the core foundation of Puppet itself. And so the 3 options you have is being able to track configurations with Jira, which you should be doing anyway, but it's a great way to be able to clearly communicate the work that's being done with Puppet. Version control can be extended with Git. And then the changes should be passed through Jenkins. So the 3 tools you want to be looking at: integration with Jira, Git, and Jenkins. So what are the resources in Puppet? Well, fundamentally, there are 4. The resources are basic units of any configuration management tool. They are the features of the nodes. They are the written catalog and the execution of the catalog on a node. So as we dig deeper into Puppet, one of the things that you are likely to be asked regarding Puppet is, what is a class in Puppet? And so a class in Puppet is really the name blocks in your manifest that contain the various configurations. And this can include services, files, and packages. And we have on the screen here an example of what a class would look like when you write it out. And you may want to memorize just one class. Don't memorize just a whole set of classes. Just memorize one. The person that's interviewing you is just really looking for someone who has a working knowledge. They're not looking for you to have memorized complete massive classes, but having one small class to be able to illustrate the experience you have is extremely valuable to the interviewer, particularly if it's a technical interview. So as we move into Ansible, one of the things that you're going to be asked around Ansible is, what is Ansible role? So a role is an independent block of tasks and variable files and templates embedded inside of the playbook. So the example we have here on the screen actually shows you one role within a playbook. And in this role, it is to install Tomcat on a node. Again, as with previous question within Puppet of a class, it's probably good to have memorized just one or two roles so you can talk knowledgeably about Ansible when you're having your interview. So when you're working with Ansible, when should you be using the curly brackets? And so just as a frame of reference, there's often two different ways that these kind of brackets are referred to. They're either referred to as French brackets or curly brackets. Either way, what you'll be wanting to ask is, when would you use these specific types of brackets within Ansible? And really, the answer comes down to two things. One is that it makes it easier to distinguish strings and undefined variables. And the second is for putting together conditional statements when you are actually using variables. And the example we have here is this prints the value of, and we have foo, and we have to then put in the variable conditional statement of foo is defined as something. So what is the best way to make content reusable and redistributable with Ansible? And there's really essentially three. The first is to include a submodule or another file in your playbook. The second is to import an improvement of an include, which ensures that a file is added only once. And then the third is roles to manage the tasks within the playbook. So a question you will be asked is, provide a differences between Ansible and Puppets. So if we look at Ansible, it's a very easy agentless installation. It's based on Python. You can configure it with YAML, and there are no support for Windows. In contrast, Puppet is an agent-based installation. It's written in Ruby. The configuration files are written in DSL, and it has support on all popular operating systems. So we dig deeper into the actual architecture. Ansible, it has a much more simple architecture, and it's definitely a push-only architecture. In contrast to Puppet, it's a more complicated but more sophisticated architecture where you're able to have a complete environment managed by the Puppet architecture.
Docker is a popular DevOps tool used to automate the deployment of applications in lightweight containers so that applications can work efficiently in different environments. Docker was initially released in 2013 and since then has become the go-to solution for containerization. In this video, we have compiled the most important Docker interview questions that you might face in a Docker or DevOps interview. So without further ado, let's get started.
So let's go through, and you're going to be asked to explain what the architecture of Docker is. And Docker really is the most popular containerization environment. So Docker uses a client-server architecture. The Docker client is a service which runs in a command line. And then the Docker daemon, which is run as a REST API within the command line, will accept the requests and interacts with the operating system in order to build the Docker images and run the Docker containers. And then the Docker image is a template of instructions which is used to create containers. The Docker container is an executable package of applications and its dependencies together. And then finally, the Docker registry is a service to host and distribute Docker images among other users. So you'll also be asked to provide what are the advantages of Docker over virtual machine. And this is something that comes up very consistently. In fact, you may want to even extend it as having what are the differences between having a dedicated machine, a virtual machine, and a Docker or Docker-like environment. And really, the arguments for Docker are just absolutely fantastic. First of all, Docker containers occupy significantly less space than a virtual machine or a dedicated machine. The boot up time on Docker is significantly faster than a VM. Containers have a much better performance as they are hosted in a single Docker image. Docker is highly efficient and very easy to scale, particularly when you start working with Kubernetes. Easily portable across multiple platforms, and then finally, for space allocation, Docker data volumes can be shared and reused among multiple containers. The argument against virtual machines is significant, and particularly if you're going into an older environment where a company is still using actual dedicated hardware and haven't moved to a cloud or cloud-like environment, your arguments for Docker are going to be very, very persuasive. Be very clear on what the advantages are for Docker over a virtual machine, because you want to be able to succinctly share them with your team. And this is something that's important when you're going through the interview process, but also equally important, particularly if you're working with a company that's transitioning or going through a digital transformation where they aren't used to working with tools like Docker. You need to be able to effectively share with that team what the benefits are. So how do we share Docker containers with different nodes? And in this instance, what you want to be able to do is leverage the power of Docker Swarm. So Docker Swarm is a tool which allows the IT administrators and developers to create and manage clusters of Swarm nodes within the Docker platform. And there are two elements to the node. There's the manager node, and then there's the worker node. The manager node, as you'd assume, manages the entire infrastructure, and the worker node is actually the work of the agent as it gets executed. So what are the commands to create a Docker Swarm? And so here we have an example of what a manager node would look like. And once you've created a swarm on your manager node, you can now add worker nodes to that swarm. And again, when you're stepping through this process, be very precise in the execution path that needs to be taken to be able to effectively create a swarm. So start with the manager node, and then you create a worker node. And then finally, when a node is initialized as a manager node, it can immediately create a token, and that token is used for the worker nodes and associating the IP address with the worker nodes. Question 17, how to run multiple containers using a single service. It is possible to run multiple containers as a single service by using Docker Compose. And Docker Compose will actually run each of the services in isolation so that they can interact with each other. The language used to write out the compose files that allow you to run the service is called YAML, and YAML stands for yet another markup language. So what is the use of a Docker file? So a Docker file actually is used for creating Docker images using the build command. So let's go through and show on the screen what that would look like. And this would be an opportunity where if you're actually in a technical interview, you could potentially even ask, hey, can I draw on a whiteboard and show you what the architecture for using the build command would look like and what the process would look like? Again, when you're going through an interview process, as someone who interviews a lot of people, one of the things that I really like is when an interview candidate does something that's slightly different. And in this instance, this is a great example of where you can stand up to the whiteboard and actually show what can actually be done through actually creating images on the whiteboard very quickly, little square boxes where you can actually show the flow for creating a build environment. As an architect, this should be something that you are comfortable doing, and by doing it in the interview, and certainly you want to ask permission before you actually do it, but doing this in the interview really helps demonstrate your comfortable feelings of working with these kind of architecture drawings. So back to the question of creating a Docker file. So we go through and we have a Docker file that actually then goes ahead and creates the Docker image, which then in turn creates the Docker container. And then we are able to push that out up to a Docker Hub and then share that Docker Hub with everybody else as part of the Docker registry with the whole network. So what are the differences between Docker image and Docker containers? So let's go through the Docker image. So the Docker images are templates of a Docker container. An image is built using a Docker file, and it stores that Docker file in a Docker repository or a Docker Hub. And you can use Docker Hub as an example. And the image layer is a read-only file system. The Docker container is a collection of the runtime instances of a Docker image, and the containers are created using Docker images, and they are stored in the Docker daemon, and every container is a read-write file system. So you can't replace the information, you can only append to it. So while you can actually use YAML for writing your, so a question you're going to be asked is, instead of YAML, what can be an alternate file to build Docker Compose? So YAML is the one that is the default, but you can also use JSON. So if you are comfortable working with JSON, and that is something that you should be get comfortable with, is you want to be able to use that to name your files. And as a frame of reference, JSON is a logical way of being able to do value paired matching using a JavaScript-like syntax. So you're going to be asked how to create a Docker container. So let's go through what that would look, and we'll break it down task by task. So the task is going to be create a MySQL Docker container. So to do that, you want to be able to build a Docker image or pull from an existing Docker image from a Docker repository or hub. And then you want to be able to then use Docker to create a new container, which has MySQL from the existing Docker image. Simultaneously, the layer of read-write file system is also created on top of that image. And below at the bottom of the screen, we have what the command lines look for that. So what is the difference between a registry and a repository? So let's go through that. So for the Docker registry and repository, for the registry, we have a Docker registry is an open source server-side service used for hosting and distributing Docker images, whereas in contrast, for repository, it's a collection of multiple versions of a Docker image. In a registry, a user can distinguish between Docker images with their tag names. And then finally, on the registry, Docker also has its own default registry called Docker Hub. For the repository, it is a collection of multiple versions of Docker images. It is stored in a Docker registry, and it has two tabs, a public and private registry, so you can actually create your own enterprise registry. So you're going to be asked, what are the cloud platforms that support Docker? Really, list them all. We have listed here Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, Rackspace, but you could add in there IBM, Bluemix. Could put in Red Hat. Really, any of the cloud service providers out there today do support Docker. It's just become an industry standard. So what is the purpose of expose and publish commands in Docker? So if we go through, expose is an instruction used in Docker file, whereas publish is used in Docker run command. For expose, it is used to expose ports within a Docker network, whereas with publish, it can be used outside of a Docker environment. For expose, it is a documenting instruction used at the time of building an image and running a container, whereas with publish, it is used to map a host port to a running container port. For expose is the command used in Docker, whereas for publish, we use the command -p for when we're doing our command line used in Docker. And examples of these are expose 8080, or with Docker, we would put in, or for publish, we would do the example Docker run -d-p and then 0.0.0.80, 80:80 as our command line. Hello and welcome to Kubernetes interview questions. Now, the great thing about being a Kubernetes expert is that there is a growing market for people wanting to hire you, and you're going to get asked a lot of questions. In this video, we're going to take you through the 30 most common questions that you are likely to be asked in a Kubernetes interview. As always, if you like this video, we have the subscribe button below and then the like button that will notify you of all new videos as they get submitted. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to post those into the questions below and we'll get back to you with answers. We try and answer as many questions as possible. So without any more hesitation, let's jump into some of the popular interview questions that you're going to get asked. We're going to break up the interview questions into three categories. It's going to be beginner, intermediate, and advanced. The beginner questions are really going to cover about 3/4 of the questions that we're going to ask here, and then the intermediate and advanced will finish out the final quarter. And the reason is that quite typically most interviews you'll be asked intermediate to beginner level questions, mainly beginner level questions, just so you can demonstrate your understanding of Kubernetes. And then there's always one advanced question that gets thrown out just to make sure that you really do know what you're talking about and you've done at least 1 or 2 Kubernetes environment setups to be able to validate your experience. So let's kind of jump into that first section, which is why is Kubernetes widely used? And your answer to this really comes into the fact that Kubernetes is widely used because of three distinct areas. One is that Kubernetes is an open source platform that is readily available for the management of containers and allows you to manage the deployment, scaling, and management of those containers. And so the first area is that it allows you for easy deployment of your containers, the ability to scale effectively within Kubernetes, not just vertically but horizontally for your containers. And then finally, the Kubernetes environment itself was really designed to make it easy to manage containers in small parts. Other key areas of why Kubernetes is popular is that Kubernetes is the single largest open source project out there. Since its launch in 2014, it's just grown in leaps and bounds. Around that project, there is just a huge community, both an online and physical community. There are just a large number of online groups that are supporting Kubernetes and allow you to get fast access to information. But in addition to that, there are also a lot of local meetup groups that cover specifically Kubernetes, whether as part of a DevOps group or as part of a dedicated Kubernetes group. The actual environment itself is a really robust way of being able to manage your containers. Containers are becoming the most popular way of being able to deploy cloud-based applications. Kubernetes is an effective and persistent storage environment. So Kubernetes is also able to effectively manage persistent storage, whether it's local storage as a SSD drive or a local hard drive, or whether it's cloud-based storage. And because of the way that Kubernetes is architecture, it's really designed for the cloud from the ground up. So it's a great way to get started in building out your cloud solutions. And then finally, the actual tools within Kubernetes are designed to help and manage the health and monitoring of the environment itself. So what is Google Container Engine? So the Google Container Engine is another open source solution, but it's designed for managing the Docker containers and clusters. And so Kubernetes is a container management solution, and Docker is the most popular container solution out there. And this is just a way of being able to bring the two effectively into each other, so that you can have Docker containers manage the application, and then Kubernetes manage the scale of your applications as they're vertically and horizontally scaled across your network. So what is the difference between Kubernetes and Docker? And this is important because Kubernetes and Docker are often dropped in the same sentence, and there's a lot of people that get confused between the two. So fundamentally, Kubernetes is about taking pods which contain containers which have applications in and deploying them at scale across a cloud network. Docker is the container solution itself. So the actual application itself is put into the Docker container. Because of this difference, Kubernetes is designed for auto-scaling, is highly available, whereas Docker simply isn't, because it doesn't have to worry about that within the container itself. The Kubernetes environment will check for liveness and readiness of the health of the entire infrastructure, whereas with Docker, it's just really going to check the services that are coming in and out of the actual application itself within the container. Kubernetes is complicated to set up. It really is just simply complicated to set up, and what you'll find is a lot of cloud services will actually do the setup for you, whereas Docker is very easy to set up. As you would expect with the tolerance ratio, there is high fault tolerance with Kubernetes, whereas with Docker is low fault tolerance. And again, this is fundamental in the two different types of strategy that Kubernetes and Docker have. They're both connected tightly with each other, but they both do different things. So what are the notable features of Kubernetes? One is the ability to do container balance. Kubernetes always knows where to place a container within its entire network, within the pods and with its infrastructure. The services are managed for security, network, and storage. It is self-monitoring, so it goes in and is able to check its own nodes for health and the containers within the nodes, so it makes sure that the applications are always running effectively. You can do the scaling effectively, both vertically and horizontally within Kubernetes. The solution is open source, so there's no actual fee for the actual Kubernetes service itself. And Kubernetes allows for storage orchestration. What does it mean by storage orchestration? Storage orchestration is that you're able to access and share either local storage, such as a hard drive or SSD drive, or a cloud-based drive. And my preference is always to go with cloud-based drive, because then you're really positioning your solution to be a true cloud-based application. So what are the main advantages of Kubernetes? Well, you get automatic rollback for changes that go wrong. You're able to automate a lot of the processes that would have been manual processes previously. You're able to scale the resources both vertically and horizontally easily and quickly. And then these three areas, the rollback, automating services, and being able to scale, indirectly allows you to save money by reducing the amount of time and people working on your operations environment. So let's break out the architecture of Kubernetes. So you're going to be asked to explain how is Kubernetes architecture structured. And there are three key areas. There's the application layer, there's the Kubernetes layer, and then there's the infrastructure layer. We're going to start off with the infrastructure layer. And so the infrastructure layer is our base layer, and this is where you make your clusters for your collections of storage and networking resources within Kubernetes. And this is where you would have, if your databases are your data stored locally on a hard drive or in the cloud, your core network and the VMs that you'd be building out your infrastructure on. These allow you to group many machines together into a single unit so that you're able to scale up and down very easily to meet customer demand. So let's talk about the middle layer, which is the Kubernetes layer now. So if we're looking at our architecture for our Kubernetes layer, it's really broken down for the core operating system, the Docker container environment, and the Kubernetes code itself. And this is where you're able to take machines and pull them together as a cluster so that they work within that Kubernetes system. You have a master controller within Kubernetes that actually then will go ahead and manage the scheduler, the control manager, the API server. And then you'll be able to cluster all of these Kubernetes together so that they're all working and processing as one single unit. And then finally, let's look at the application layer where you actually have your apps. And so the application layer, where you have your pool and your services, Kubernetes will use API to connect in and out of this layer. It's to run your applications within containers, and you use instructions that are written in YAML or JSON to actually set up those containers. And you actually have the environment running on a plan that examines these instructions so it keeps the entire environment healthy. API ecosystem is used to interact with the cluster. So you don't have to do that by yourself. So make sure that you're referencing that the APIs are secured and connecting in and out of the system. And so you have your schedule and control manager actually from the Kubernetes environment doing the hard work, and then the workers themselves execute the commands that are coming from Kubernetes. So you will be asked to kind of dig into some of the key areas, such as explaining the master node and listing its components. So the master node is comprised of 4 key components. There's the cluster store, the controller manager, the scheduler, and the API server. So 4 key components. Remember, 4 fingers, 4 components. And then you're going to be asked to maybe dig deeper into what is a cluster within Kubernetes. And so a cluster is really a combination of resources such as machines into a single node. And then those nodes are pulled together and work as a single cluster as a whole. Kubernetes will work with that whole cluster. And then once you're actually working with that whole cluster, if a node fails or needs to be removed, Kubernetes is able to do that quickly and effectively. So let's talk a little bit about what are the different types of controllers in Kubernetes. And there are 5 types of control manager. You have the node controller, the service account, the token controller, the endpoint controller, and the replication controller. And so the node controller controls and handles the node in the system. The service account enables access controls in the system. The token controller cleans up any tokens for non-existent service accounts. The endpoint controller joins services in pods to the endpoint objects, and the replication controller manages the pod lifecycle. So what is the role of the cloud controller manager within this environment? And so the role of the cloud control manager is really to help manage persistent storage. And so persistent storage is storage that's either local storage to the physical machine, such as an SSD or hard drive, or cloud-based storage. And this allows the storage to be shared across the entire network. What is the role of the Kube API server and the Kube scheduler? So the Kube API server is responsible for the establishment of communication between the Kubernetes nodes and the master components, and it does this access through through APIs. The APIs themselves are all commands that are REST-based commands, and it implements an interface, which means different tools and libraries can communicate effectively with each other. So what is the role of the Kube API server and the Kube scheduler? So the Kube scheduler actually does the distribution of work across the entire infrastructure. So the actual YAML scripts that you've written are executed appropriately at the right time. So you're going to be asked to explain persistent volumes in Kubernetes. So a persistent volume is just a place where you can store data. Again, this can be local data, as in a hard drive local to the physical machine, or it can be cloud-based data. So what is a kubelet and a kube proxy? So a kubelet is a service responsible for conveying information to and from the control plane itself. The process, the kube proxy itself is responsible for maintaining the work and the status within the node server. In addition, every node in the cluster runs a simple network proxy, and kube proxy routes requests to the correct container in that node. In addition, you'll have some basic and primitive load balancing and management of the node from the proxy itself. There's additional layers of management that get done outside of the proxy, but the proxy is also there to help do some localized load management. So what is kubectl? So kubectl is your command line or terminal window interface that allows you to execute commands, and later in this video we'll actually go through some of those commands. etcd is the store that configures the details and essential values such as key value pairs that are distributed across your entire network. It also manages the network rules and the post forwarding of activity. So what are the disadvantages of Kubernetes? Well, the first is it's really hard to install and configure, and this is why Azure and many cloud services such as Google Cloud will actually do the installation and configuration of Kubernetes for you. It does take a long time to get up and running with Kubernetes, not so much for the actual software, but your own experience of being able to use Kubernetes. It is not simple to manage the service. You actually have to have a lot of experience, and this is why people get paid a lot for Kubernetes skills. It's a difficult environment to get up and running and be effective in that management. Again, Kubernetes is just not an easy platform to learn. It takes a lot of time and effort. And one of the disadvantages is that while Kubernetes itself is free because it is an open source project, getting the people who are skilled to using Kubernetes is expensive. All right, so those were kind of the introductory questions that you can expect to be asked in your interview. The next set of questions are really going to be on an intermediate and advanced level, and these are the questions that will be thrown out. You know, you see these as being the trick questions, which are really there to test that you have the skill set to be able to implement and manage Kubernetes within a company. So what happens if a master node fails? What happens if a worker node fails? How would Kubernetes manage that? Well, Kubernetes is really designed for this kind of scenario, and so you can actually look at it, and the response would be is that the pod itself does not get affected. Kubernetes will actually respond and fix the failed node, whether it is needs to be repaired, whether it needs to be restarted, or needs to be replaced. So what is a service role in Kubernetes? So a service role is an abstraction for all the pods. It provides a virtual IP address and allows clients to connect to containers running in the pods using that virtual IP address. And the command that you would use to get that, we would use some of these kubectl commands. It's quite a simple one. It's kubectl get services, and you get a full list then of all the services that are available. So how do I do a rollback in deployment? So there's a couple of ways you can do the rollback. The first is if you want to see the rollout history deployment, you would write kubectl rollout history deployment and then in square brackets deployment. If you want to just restore to the previous rollout, the command would be kubectl rollout undo deployment and then in square brackets deployment, and that would take you back to the previous deployment. So what is an ingress controller? So an ingress controller really is a pod that manages that inbound traffic, and a prominent feature of that traffic is that it is secured with an SSL termination. And so what we're going to do to now address some of the key ways in which you can provide API securities on Kubernetes, and we have 8 of those. The first 4 are implementing TLS for your security. The second would be API authentication. The third is to make the kubeless protection, the kubeless protected via authorization mode equals webhook command. The fourth is to monitor RBAC failures. The fifth is to remove those default service account permissions. 6 would be to filter egress to Cloud API metadata APIs. The 7th is to use pod security policy to restrict container policies and protect the node. And the 8th and final is to keep the kube at the latest version. All right, let's go into some of the more advanced commands. And so the advanced questions that you're going to get are all going to be commands that you're going to be asked to write. Now, my advice for you for these questions is to make sure that you have some of these basic commands memorized. They don't have to be perfect when you're in the interview environment, but it's good to be able to get up to a whiteboard and actually write out what these commands are, just so you can actually demonstrate that you know what the commands are. The interviewer isn't going to ask you questions on how would you apply Kubernetes to the company that you're being hired for, because you simply don't have that knowledge. But they do want to be able to see clearly that you understand the commands and terminal window instructions that will be able to demonstrate how you would actually go in and access some of that information. So one of the first questions you might be asked is, how do you package Kubernetes applications? And so you would use the package manager within Kubernetes to be able to manage and configure and deploy applications into your cluster. And so here we have the Helm command that you would use. So what are init containers? And init container gets executed before any other containers can run on the pod. And so you want to be able to illustrate what the init instructions would look like. And here we have an example, and I would again use this example and maybe memorize it for when you have this question come up in your interview. So what is the difference between a config map and a secret? And these are more fundamental. So a config map just has the instructions that are clearly available in plain text on what the kube is supposed to do, whereas the secrets are actually encrypted, and these are like passwords and other sensitive data that you don't want to have easily available. These are encrypted information and have to be decrypted to access the content. So if a node is tainted, is there a way to schedule the pods to that node? And the answer is no, there isn't. And so what you have to do then is schedule the pod to be fixed, and so that schedule the pod to fix the tainted node to allow for tolerations to that. And we have here the example code that you would use to do that. So how do you deploy a feature with zero downtime in Kubernetes? Well, Kubernetes is designed to be able to roll out applications with zero downtime. And here we have 4 examples using the rolling update as a strategy for zero downtime deployments in Kubernetes. Again, memorize one of these so you can actually illustrate how you use rollout to be able to deploy a zero downtime solution. So how do you monitor a pod that is always running? And so to do that, you would use the liveness probe to check the health of the application within the pod and see whether or not there are any failures or whether or not the pod itself needs to be restarted. So how do you drain traffic from a pod during a maintenance? So again, this is a simple command for you to remember, but to be able to drain an application so that it's easy for you to be able to do maintenance on the application, you would use the kubectl drain and then in square brackets the node name, and that would then temporarily drain that particular pod so you can actually do maintenance on it. What you have to then, and this would probably give you bonus points if you're in an interview, is then reference the uncordon command so that you can uncordon the actual node itself so that the pod itself can come back up into live and work as a fully functioning solution. So to be able to tie services to a pod or to a set of pods is that you can apply labels to the actual pods themselves and then use the labels as selectors to be able to glue services to that pod. And again, we have here an example of how you'd actually do that. And again, this is one of those where you can probably won't be asked to write this out, but it'd be good to have this memorized. How do you get all pods on a node? And so the following command will actually go ahead and bring all the pods into a Kubernetes cluster. This is quite lengthy, and maybe you want to talk to how this would be done, but we have the instructions on how to do that right here. The important part is to make sure that you, when you're talking about the node name, that you reference to whoever you're interviewing, that what you would switch out to reference the actual nodes that you're trying to pull together into the Kubernetes cluster. So how do pods mount NFS volumes? And so in these examples here, we actually define the NFS server and then the pod and how you'd actually mount two together. Again, what you want to be able to do is illustrate why you would use YAML and how you'd actually then point to specific IP addresses within your Kubernetes environment, within either the production or test environments, to be able to illustrate how you would mount up those NFS volumes.
Nagios or Nagios Core is a free open source computer software that is used to monitor systems, networks, and infrastructure. Nagios was initially released in 2002 and since then has become the go-to solution for monitoring in the DevOps lifecycle. In this video, we have compiled the most important Nagios interview questions that you might face in a Nagios or DevOps interview. So without further ado, let's get started.
So let's look at continuous monitoring. So with continuous monitoring, how does Nagios help in continuous monitoring of systems, applications, and servers? And so this is really just a high-level question of using Nagios within your environment. And you should be able to just come back very quickly and say, Nagios allows you to help manage the servers and check if they're being sufficiently utilized and if there are any task failures that need to be addressed. And so there are three areas of utilization and risk that you want to be able to manage. This is being able to verify the status and services of the entire network, the health of your infrastructure as a whole, and if applications are working properly together with web services and APIs that are reachable. So the second question you'll be asked is, how does Nagios help in continuous monitoring of systems, applications, and services? So it's able to do this by having the initial Nagios process and scheduler and the additional plugins that you would use for your network connect with the remote resources and the Nagios web interface to be able to run status checks on a predefined schedule. So what do you mean by Nagios Remote Plugin Executor, or the NPRE of Nagios? So NPRE allows you to execute plugins on Linux Unix machines that allow you to do additional monitoring and machine metrics such as disk usage, CPU load, etc. What are the ports used by Nagios for monitoring purposes? In this example, there are three, and they're easy to remember, so I would memorize these three, but they're essentially ports 5666, 5667, and 5668. So there are two types of checks within Nagios. So you will be asked for what is an active and passive check in Nagios. So an active check is initiated by the Nagios process and is run on a regular schedule. A passive check is initiated and formed by an external application or process. So this may be where a system is failing. And results are submitted to Nagios for processing. And to continue with this, for what is an active and passive check, active checks are initiated by the check logic within the Nagios daemon. Nagios will execute a plugin and pass information about what needs to be checked. Plugin will then check the operational state of the host or service and then process the results of the host or service check and send out notifications. In contrast with the passive check, it is an external application that initiates the check. It writes the results of the check to an external command line file. Nagios reads the external command file and places the results of all passive checks in a queue for later processing, so you can go back and revalidate. And then Nagios may send out notifications, log alerts, etc., depending on the results that they get from checking the information. So you're going to be asked to explain the main configuration file and its location in Nagios. So the main configuration file consists of a number of directives that affect how Nagios operates. So consider this as the configuration file that it's read by both Nagios processor and the CGIs. So this will allow you to be able to manage the main configuration file that's placed into your settings directory. So what is the Nagios Network Analyzer? And again, hold out your 4 fingers because there are 4 options here. So the Nagios Network Analyzer 1, provides an in-depth look at all your network traffic source and security threats. 2, allows system admins to gather high-level information on the health of your network. 3, provides a central view of your network traffic and bandwidth data. And then 4, allows you to proactive in resolving outages, abnormal behavior, and threats before they affect critical business processes. So what are the benefits of HTTP and SSL certificate monitoring with Nagios? So with HTTP certificate monitoring, it allows you to have increased server and services and application availability, obviously very important, fast detection of network outages and protocol failures, and allows web transaction and web service performance monitoring. The SSL certificate monitoring allows you for increased website availability, frequent application availability, and provides increased security. So explain virtualization with Nagios. So in response to this, the first thing you should be able to talk about is how Nagios itself can run on many different virtualization platforms, including Microsoft Visual PC, VMware, Xen, Amazon EC2, etc., etc. So just make sure you get that right off the bat. Nagios was able to provide capabilities to monitor an assortment of metrics on different platforms. It allows for quick detection of service and application failures, and has the ability to be able to monitor against many metrics, including CPU usage, memory, networking, and VM status. So name the 3 variables that affect recursion inheritance in Nagios, and it is name, use, and register. So name is a template name that can be referenced in other object definitions. Use specifies the name of the template object that you want to inherit its properties and variables from. And register indicates whether or not the object definition should be registered to Nagios. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we have an example of what that script would look like. Again, you may want to be able to memorize this, as it's something that you can actually write down and show someone if you're going through a technical interview. So why is Nagios said to be object-oriented? And fundamentally, it comes down to the object configuration format that you can use in your object definitions. It allows you to inherit properties from other object definitions, and this is typical of object-oriented development and is now applied for the Nagios environment. So some of the objects that you can inherit are services, hosts, commands, and time periods. So finally, explain what is state talking in Nagios. And so there are really 4 options here when you're talking about state stalking. So state stalking is used for logging purposes in Nagios. It allows you to enable for a particular host or service that Nagios will watch over very carefully. It will log any changes it sees in the output of the check results. And then finally, helps the analysis of log files.
Jenkins is a popular DevOps open source automation server. It is used to automate the non-human part of software development and supports continuous integration and continuous delivery. Jenkins is a server-based system that runs in servlet containers such as Apache Tomcat. We have compiled the most important Jenkins interview questions that you might face in a Jenkins or DevOps interview. So without further ado, let us get started with Jenkins interview questions and answers.
So the first question you'll be asked about with Jenkins is explain a master-slave architecture of Jenkins. So the way that Jenkins is set up is that the Jenkins master will pull code from your remote Git repository such as GitHub and will check that repository every time there is a code commit. It will distribute the workload of that code and the tests that need to be applied to that code to all of the Jenkins slaves. And then on request, the Jenkins master and the slaves will then carry out all the builds and tests to be able to produce test reports. The next question you'll be asked is, what is a Jenkins file? And simply put, a Jenkins file is a text file that has a definition of the Jenkins pipeline and is checked into a source code repository. And this really allows for 3 distinct things to happen. One, it allows for a code review and iteration of the pipeline. It permits an audit trail for that pipeline and also provides a single source of truth for the pipeline, which can be viewed and edited. So which of the following commands runs Jenkins from the command line? Is it java-jar jenkins.war, java-war jenkins.jar, java. java-jar jenkins.jar, java-war jenkins.war. And the answer is A, java-jar jenkins.war. So when working with Jenkins, you're going to be asked what are the key concepts and aspects of working with a Jenkins pipeline. And you want to really hold out your fingers here and go through 4 key areas, and that is pipeline, node, step, and stage. So pipeline refers to the user-defined model of a CD continuous delivery pipeline. Node are the machines which are part of that Jenkins environment within the pipeline. Step is a single task that tells Jenkins what to do at that particular point in time. And then finally, stage defines a conceptually distinct subset of tasks performed through the entire pipeline. And tasks could be build, test, and deploy. So which of the following file is used to define dependency in Maven? And do we have A, build.xml, B, pom.xml, C, dependency.xml, or D, version.xml? And the answer is pom.xml. Working with Jenkins, you're going to be asked to explain the 2 types of pipeline used in Jenkins along with the syntax. And so a scripted pipeline is based on GroovyScript as their domain-specific language for Jenkins. And there are 1 or more node blocks that are used throughout the entire pipeline. On the left-hand side, you can actually see what the actual script would look like, and the right-hand side shows what the actual declaration for each section of that script would be. The second type of Jenkins pipeline is a declarative pipeline. And a declarative pipeline provides a simple and a friendly syntax to define what the pipeline should look like. And then you can actually, at this point, use an example to actually break out how blocks are used to define the work completed in a declarative pipeline. So how do you create a copy and backup of Jenkins? Well, to create a backup, periodically back up Jenkins to your Jenkins home directory, and then create a copy of that directory. It's really as simple as that. A question you'll be asked as well is how can you copy Jenkins from one server to another? Well, there are 3 ways to do that. One is you can move a job from one installation of Jenkins to another by copying the corresponding job directory. The second would be to create a copy of an existing job directory and making a clone of that job directory but with a different name. And the third is to rename an existing job by renaming a directory. So security is fundamental to all the work that we do within DevOps, and Jenkins provides the center core to all the work that gets completed within a DevOps environment. There are 3 ways in which you can apply security to authenticate users effectively. And when you are asked about this question of security within Jenkins, the 3 responses you want to be able to provide is A, Jenkins has its own internal database that uses secured user data and user credentials. B is you can use a LDAP or lightweight directory access protocol server to be able to authenticate Jenkins users. Or C, you can actually configure Jenkins to authenticate by using such as OAuth, which is a more modern method of being able to authenticate users. You're going to be asked how to deploy a custom build of a core plugin within Jenkins. And essentially, the 4 steps that you want to go through are, first of all, copying the .hpi plugin file into the Jenkins home plugins subdirectory. You want to remove the plugin's development directory if there is one. You want to create an empty file called plugin.hpi.pinned. And once you've completed these 3 steps, restart Jenkins and your custom build plugin should be available. How can you temporarily turn off Jenkins security if the administrative user has locked themselves out of the admin console? Well, this doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's good to know how you can actually get into Jenkins and be able to resolve the problems of authenticating effectively into the system as an administrator. So when you want to be able to get into a Jenkins environment, what you want to be able to do is locate the config file. You should see that it's set to true, which allows for security to be enabled. If you then change the user security setting to false, security will be disabled, allowing you to make your administrative changes and will not be re-enabled until the next time Jenkins is restarted. So what are the ways in which a build can be scheduled and run in Jenkins? Well, there are 4 ways in which you can identify the way a build can be scheduled or run in Jenkins. The first is when source code management commits new code into the repository. You can run Jenkins at that point. The second can be after the completion of other builds. So maybe you have multiple builds in your project that are dependent to each other, and when so many other builds have been executed, then you can have Jenkins run. You can schedule builds to run at a specified time. So you may have nightly builds of your code that illustrate the changes in the solution you're building. And then finally, you also can manually build an environment on request. Occasionally, you will want to also restart Jenkins. And so it's good that when a question around how do you restart Jenkins manually comes up, that you have the answers. And there are 2 ways in which you can do it. One is you can force a restart without waiting for builds to complete by using the Jenkins URL that you have for your environment /restart, or you can allow all running builds to complete before restart are required, and in which case you would use the command of the URL for your Jenkins environment /safe restart.
Now with that, we have come to an end of day 6 and also the DevOps week by Simplilearn. Hope the week was informative and interesting. If you have missed out on any of the sessions, then please feel free to check them out in our official YouTube channel, the link to which is in the description box below. And if you have any queries, then please leave them down in the comment section below and our team of experts will be happy to resolve all your queries. Hoping to see you again on another exciting learning week by Simplilearn. Until next time, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for more from Simplilearn.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.